All right, we are here, Eileen Cook and Crystal Hunt, chatting with you about building better settings. And the topic of this conversation is object symbols, symbolism, and how the environment and settings in the Hunger Games are used to level up, exacerbate, enhance, do all good things for the overall meaning and story and the evolution of Katniss's character as well. So we're going to dig into that, but we're going to start first with just a little bit of chat about what are some of the heavy symbolism options that are going on in the Hunger Games, and they may be ones you've thought about before and maybe not, but I happen to know Eileen is pretty keen on this kind of thing and has gone pretty deep down this particular line of inquiry. So let's talk about symbolism in the Hunger Games. Lay it on me. What do you got?
This is where we all suddenly admit that I apparently deep in my heart beats the heart of an English teacher, where I'm like, I know the symbolism of all of this. I mean, I think one of the things that the Hunger Games really tapped into, which I think is kind of universal for a lot of fantasy or sci-fi stories, is a way to explore what's currently happening in our world by putting it in a make-believe world, and it allows us to look at things in a different way. So at its most basic level, I don't think it's a big stretch for any of us to realize that the Hunger Games is really a stand-in a lot of ways for social media and reality TV, and this way that we are all sort of making ourselves into a commodity, right? And so this is the extreme, hopefully the extreme version of this, where instead of just trying to be, an influencer where you get things donated, but where you're an influencer who needs weapons donated so that you can compete to a death match. So it's kind of that extreme. But there's also a lot of other things that people may or may not notice. Again, this is my English teacher thing that goes down my heart. Is there are 13 districts in the Hunger Games, and there were also 13 original colonies in the US. And I don't think that that's an accident, right? So there were 13 colonies in the US that all had to pay tribute to the UK, right? Which was our overlord at the time, right? And so there was a whole movement around, give us liberty or give us death, right? So there was a revolution that happened in that original thing. So again, I don't think that that's an accident. And then one of the fun things, rabbit holes that I went down is in the Hunger Games, the name of the country is Panem, Panem. And I actually just ended up Googling that word because I was just curious where it might have come from. This is a call out to everybody else who uses baby naming books and various things. So you have to know the meaning behind everything. But a lot of people may not know that Panem is Latin for bread. And there was a Roman saying that was very popular. Again, if you ever liked the movie like Gladiator, which was basically bread in circuses, panem et circus rei. I'm sure I just butchered that pronunciation, but there you go. And that was the whole idea that you could keep down dissent if you could keep people fed and entertained. So I'm just going to go out a call out that sure, maybe it's an accident that Suzanne Collins named the country after this, but I don't think it was. I think it was on purpose. I don't think anything was on accident. And I ended up, I think the one that we'll probably talk about because I just think it's fun to drill down is the one that kind of shows up in everything, which is the mockingjay. So I don't know if anyone looked it up, but of course I first had to know whether or not a mockingjay was a real bird, um, because I was like, I think it might be. I don't know, and it's not. There's a mockingbird, but this came from in the book. They talk about being there's jabberjays, which were spy birds that were used, and then when they didn't work out, they just were sort of set free, and they ended up hooking up with some mockingbirds, and that's where we get the mockingjay. But that's not really how mockingjays are used in the book. So I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit about what you noticed at kind of those different levels, Crystal.
Yeah, I had not paid a lot of explicit attention to this until we were getting ready to teach a masterclass on setting for the Surrey International Writers Conference, and we were looking for examples of movies or books or both where the authors, the creators had done a really good job of really layering in meaning to every layer of their setting. And this is one that really popped out to me. And I actually sort of started thinking about it, and then I sat down and I rewatched all 3 movies because I thought that might be quicker than rereading all of the book series, which turned out to be true. So I did that. So for any folks who have issues, if we're talking about the movies here, not the books. I know there may be differences between the books and the movies, but I couldn't call them all to mind. So hopefully give us a little bit of leeway here. But some of the things that really popped out to me, that I thought they just did fabulously well and that were cool and interesting and subtle, but also really impactful, was just seeing the way that the Mockingjay evolves throughout the series. And I think it starts off, we're introduced to it really quickly in those opening scenes when Prue hands Katniss this Mockingjay pin, for luck. And in because she's taking her place in the arena and she's headed off to the Hunger Games, and we think at this point likely won't survive. So it's a symbol kind of hope, I guess, and also love from her sister. Um,
And their
and
dad,
then
because their dad was the one who used to do the Mockingjay call.
right,
That's the only
okay,
connection.
nice, all right. And when she goes, she takes this pin with her, and it becomes this point of connection in a bunch of interesting ways. She bonds with uh oh, what's the girl's name? It has complete
True?
Rue. That's why. Because I always think it's so close to her sister's name, and then I feel like I've got the wrong one. Rue. She bonds with Rue in the arena, and then it ends up being this rallying cry for the whole other district, right? And it becomes something that they kind of connect over, and it starts to take on more and more meaning as we go. So I'm just curious, what were some of the places that it jumped out to you, Eileen? Was there like specific things that ring in your memory? Because I had completely forgotten about the father connection. So I'm guessing that our brains that remember different pieces are remembering different things. So is there anything that jumps to mind for you?
The one that sticks out in my head, which is, again, it's a pin at the beginning, and there's a scene, and I can't remember if it's in the book or the movie because I can't keep the two apart in my own head anymore. But where they're talking about, she wanted to bring this pin with her, and someone says that she almost wasn't allowed to bring it because they thought it could be used as a weapon, right? Because it's a pin, right? And then you, of course, you realize like it is going to become a weapon, right? Like it's going to become the ultimate weapon. So there's this sort of joke in the beginning of like, what can this thing do? It's just this little tiny pin, right? It's like sort of when you can't bring your nail clippers on the flight, right? Like, really, what am I doing with this? Right? Like it's this little tiny pin, but from this small thing, which she is, right? Because I think it's pretty safe to say she becomes in so many ways, like you talked about with the costuming, she actually becomes the Mockingjay. Um, that she becomes the ultimate weapon. So that's one of the ones that really sticks out in my head.
Yeah, for sure. There's a scene, just to ground you in the costuming if you haven't seen it, and we will put a link to the video that shows this scene below this conversation. But there's a part where she's supposed to be getting married to Peta, who is bread boy. Interestingly, he's a baker, so that kind of ties things back around to the bread symbolism from the beginning. But she's supposed to be getting married, and she's got this wedding dress on, and she's standing on the stage, and the wedding's not happening because they've been called back to go back into this other Hunger Games. And so now they're gonna fight to the death again. And so she does this twirl, and her costume designer has created it so that the wedding dress lights on fire and it burns up. She becomes the girl on fire, but the girl on fire is gone actually by the end of that. And what's revealed is the outfit underneath the wedding dress is a Mockingjay costume, and she is full wingspan when she raises her arms. And it was just it's also the moment in the series where she becomes publicly defiant and owns that. And it's really interesting because earlier on in the series, you see like people might be kind of hiding something that is the Mockingjay symbol it's like you go through this train tunnel at one point and there's just flash of light, and if you're watching really carefully, you can see that there's a Mockingjay symbol graffitied on the inside of this like rapid train tunnel, and it's like a split second glimpse of it. And then as time goes by, those symbols start to be more and more public. People start actually using the hand gestures, and there's a song that Rue does called Rue's song, but it's the sound the Mockingjay makes. And so it's really interesting to see those elements in the setting kind of come out. And there's another really standout scene in my mind when they're working their way through the city, which has been just destroyed. And things are looking pretty bad. Like they're under attack, everything's kind of hopeless. And then you see the Mockingjay symbol has been spray painted up onto the column on this completely crumbling building. The rest of the building might be crumbled, but that is still there. And I just thought that was a really powerful, like it's in their surroundings and it's just in the background of the shot. Like if you're not watching, you might not even notice it. But what rewatching with my setting as character arc goggles on was really interesting to see that transition from the secret and hidden to the public, and that moment for Katniss when she has that kind of clothing change and she does that super public declaration. It was the moment where it goes from her wearing a symbol to her being the symbol, is how that really felt to me in watching it. So that was really interesting just to see that transition happening in her and in all the choices they made in her costumes and her clothing, which is something that we talk about in the setting book as being part of setting. And we see as much in a setting of what we're not wearing, like what stays in the closet, what gets burnt to ashes. That's all very revealing, and it is all stuff that's around our character and in the environment. So that's really interesting.
This is where if we'd planned it correctly, we would both stand up and spin out of our sweatpants into some giant superhero riding outfit, but we didn't plan ahead, damn it. And I just want to build on, I think there's so much we can learn by, we're talking about costuming, but it's really clothing choices because they're our imaginary friends. They're real. It's not a costume for them. Is really looking at how characters look different. And I know we talked about that in the book, but even if you look at just even the first movie or the first book, what Katniss looks like in the beginning of the book, and then what she looks like at the end of the book, right? And so she's going from kind of these sort of earth colored, very, one step above kind of a rags kind of outfit to, at the end of the book, she's appearing on this TV show in the girl on fire dress. And, she's changing, and that just keeps evolving, as you're pointing out, as the books go on, as the movie goes on. What she's wearing is a reinforcement. And I think that, if in nothing else, if people are going back and looking at the Hunger Games, yeah, there's all the things you can look at. You can look at um, the role of dandelions, because they show up a bunch of times in the book as well as in the movie as kind of this idea of sort of hope and that you can gather your own strength. But the Mockingjay is the one that's probably the most consistent. And so, as you kind of say, where it fits into the background and where it stands out from the background. And that's where Crystal's gonna cough, but we're gonna mute that part so you don't get to see it. Or you don't get to hear it. You just gotta sort of plan along with it. So
I'll die quietly in the background.
you slip out from under the screen, it's gonna be a very interesting video. So that is there anything else that you would add? But I mean, I would just tell people to go back and watch either the first movie or even better, all three of them, and look at things like where scenes are happening and what those places look like. It's a classic setup, the first one where she starts in the district. She goes off, she has this adventure in the capital, then eventually the arena, then back to the capital, and then all the way back again to her district, and how she's different in each one of those spaces as she has changed. She's a very different person at the end of that first book and first movie in how she looks and how she interacts in that space. And if you can capture that, then you're really going to see what we were trying to drive for and try and give you some really direct prompts with in the book. So that is going to be our reminder to always get your cough medicine and to be sure to check out Build Better Settings. So we're going to have a link to where you can get the book if you haven't already checked it out. And if you get the book, you'll see there are a lot of your turn sections that will let you take something like we just did with the Hunger Games and see how you could potentially apply it to your own work. So what those symbols, what's going to be your Mockingjay? That's what we want to know.